Good afternoon, everyone. This is Tej Patel. I'm here with Mark Spencer and George O with a very special edition of Anno Talk. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce my neighbor to the north, Mark Spencer. Mark, take it away.
Hey, Tej, thank you. And this is an exciting podcast. You can just feel it through the vibe of the internet, the World Wide Web. Here we are. It's our first broadcast of 2022 Anno Talk, all things anodizing, and we're going to do a round robin. And we're going to mix in some questions, believe it or not, from the mailbag, from people that sent in from all over the country to talk about today's topic. But before we get on to others, my name is Mark Spencer. I'm a sales manager up here at Akron Anodizing in lovely Plymouth, Minnesota. Now, if we're listening to this in the summertime, what I'm going to say next doesn't really matter, but we are expected to have the storm of the century tonight and tomorrow. We're going to have 7 inches of snow, probably shut down Alpharetta, but here in Plymouth, we'll be okay. Introducing my next colleague, Dr. George O.
Well, thank you for the lovely introduction, Mark. I have to say 7 inches of snow is more than I've ever seen. So good luck with that. I'm here in sunny Alpharetta, Georgia, and I'm Giorgio, and I am a research and development chemist for Quaker Houghton. And I'm just excited to talk about our topic for the day. So yeah, take it away, Tej.
All right, everybody. Once again, Tej Patel here. I'm a director at Tech-II. We're going to go through a potpourri of questions that we received from our AAC member base, but also other questions that the three of us have encountered through dealing with our vendors, dealing with our customers. So the hope is from the roundtable, we're able to get a lot of the mystery associated with anodizing understood. So to start off, we'll fire out just the most basic question. What is Type-II sulfuric anodizing? George, why don't you start us off with that and give us your thoughts on what you believe it is?
Oh, Lord. Okay. So I will confess that I'm relatively speaking the newbie here. I only have 4 years of experience in the industry, but like any other kind of anodizing, Type-II anodizing uses electrical current to develop an oxide on your aluminum substrate. The key here is that Type-II sulfuric anodizing uses obviously sulfuric anodizing. And what it does is it builds a mill thickness of, I believe, up to about, I think the cutoff is about what, like 1 or 2 mils or something like that?
Yeah, two being the highest, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and more typically, you'll see something in the range of like 0.3 mils or 0.7 mils or so. And what is that in decimeters or microns, because that comes up too, right?
20, Mark, you can answer this one because you're really good with metric, but anywhere, I think 25 microns is about 1 mil if my monkey math is right. But you're the resident unit of measure conversion expert amongst the three of us. What do you think?
Oh gosh, I mean, I'm gonna look this up right now. So mil.
No pressure, Mark. There's no pressure here. I just want you to make sure you get this right.
Dr. O has already volunteered. He's looking it up right now.
Yeah,
I think
you're right.
If I was to speculate, I think 25.4, but what do you say, Doc O?
That is magical, Mark. I looked it up on Google and you got the exact right number.
Well, you know what? We gotta make sure the people at Akron know they have a pretty knowledgeable sales manager over there. That's impressive.
They do, right? Just right off the cuff.
Exactly. It's a good point of distinction, though, obviously, because internationally, microns are typically the traditional metric for that. But yeah, George, I would agree. I think at the end of the day, you're trying to build a ceramic coating on a piece of aluminum by putting it into an electrolyte. Now, the other interesting part of this, and I'll speak from my perspective, I think there's a misnomer around metal finishing. Obviously, metal finishing includes a lot of plating chemistry. So you're plating electroless nickel, tin plating, nickel plating, chrome plating. And in all of those processes, there's a lot of waste and environmentally regulatory issues, right? You're dealing with heavy metals.
Yep.
The nice thing about anodizing is that the electrolyte, which is what you're dipping those parts in, is basically sulfuric acid and water. So from an environmental perspective, you're not sending anything down outside of your anodizing tank, assuming you're using aluminum cathodes, that's particularly dangerous. Obviously, you'll adjust the pH, but at its most fundamental level, yeah, the electrolytes dilute sulfuric acid.
Yeah.
I would like to add the following, if it's okay with my esteemed colleagues.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You're in charge, boss.
Anodizing is the electrochemical process of converting aluminum into aluminum oxide under controlled conditions.
Ooh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, see, and that controlled conditions, that's not anodizing by voltage only, right?
Correct.
Is that
Yeah.
control? Would you agree?
Well, there's a number of ways to control. You could do constant current or constant voltage. Some ways are better than others.
That'd be a good discussion.
Yeah, I mean, now before we pick a side of what we believe in, yeah, exactly. So I believe what you're referring to, Mark, is how do you build that coating? Do you do it by leaving the current at a specific square footage or amps per square foot, or do you leave the voltage, let's say 15 to 16 volts? There are benefits and disadvantages to both, in my opinion. Constant current gives you a much more accurate deposition and buildup of coating. It ensures the right amount of coating is built. It ensures the correct density of the current is built. The challenge with that process is you need to have a good understanding of what the square footage of a load is in your tank. And in many cases, anodizers don't know what the square footage is. So they'll anodize with constant voltage. And what that means is they'll set the voltage on their rectifier to anywhere between 14 and 17 volts, depending on what their chemistry looks like. And they'll let the parts sit there for a period of time, letting the amps rise as the process continues. And then it'll eventually drop down after that. The issue with the constant voltage process, from my perspective, is you are not accounting for the square footage correctly, and you may run the risk of anodizing a part at a lower amps to square foot or current density, resulting in a soft coating, a coating that isn't as durable as its constant current counterpart, which is it's a loaded statement, but it's something that I would encourage people to understand, because if you're doing, for example, hard coat, which is type 3 sulfuric anodizing, you need to ensure that your current density is of a minimum of 24 amps per square foot. If it's not, you're technically not doing hard coat. And Mark knows the risks of what happens when you give a customer something that isn't hard coat when they've been told what hard coat is, and it's not pretty.
You have any stories?
Stories? Never have stories. That's never happened here. Not on my watch, Tej.
Good. Well, I'm sure you've taken advantage of the fact.
Maybe at other locations.
Yes.
And you're trying to sell something that's a hard coat and it has a white powdery substance on the surface. Maybe you didn't have enough current density, or your sulfuric acid was too high in concentration, or temperature was too high in the bath. It might have burnt something. Never happened.
So while we're talking about sulfuric acid, since out of the three of us, George is clearly the most qualified as it relates to chemical knowledge and chemistry knowledge. George, tell us in the scheme of things, because when you hear the word acid, when I hear the word acid, I think of stuff that's going to melt my face or my body or my bones, or can eat through metal. How would you describe sulfuric acid in the grand scheme of things? Because that's a concern one of our members wrote, is that in the grand scheme of things, how careful do we need to be with sulfuric acid? Because anodizers and metal finishers deal with a lot of different chemicals. So what would be your take on that?
Okay. Obviously, these don't necessarily represent the views of my parent company. But in the grand scheme of things, sulfuric anodizing or sulfuric acid rather, it's not bad. It's not safe. Like, you don't want to dip your foot into it, mostly because more so than a lot of other acids, sulfuric acid really hurts. It hurts a lot, which is actually kind of good, because if you got some sulfuric acid on you, it starts to hurt immediately, and you're like, I should probably wash that off. But from a safety perspective in general, I would say it's okay. You have your acids like hydrofluoric acid, where you get some on you and you don't wash it off and you just die if you don't take the antidote. You've got things like nitric acid, where if you run certain reactions or cook them, you start generating those delicious brown fumes, which are extremely toxic. You've got things like hydrochloric acid, which just has such a high vapor pressure that you can really inhale a lot of hydrochloric acid and really damage your respiratory system. With sulfuric acid, as long as you have good controls, you don't have to worry about inhaling sulfuric acid because it's so much denser and so much heavier.
One other question, because I took chemistry class in high school and in college, and I quickly learned that when you're making additions of water to acid, you need to be aware of a few things. I may have posed this question in the roundtable, or this may have come from a friend of mine, but what would you advise anodizers if they need to make additions or make anodizing tanks up using sulfuric acid from a handling perspective and a procedural perspective as it relates to water?
Well, what you need to do is you need to add the water first, and then you need to add the sulfuric acid, because what happens is when sulfuric acid is diluted, it heats up the solution of whatever it's in very quickly. So if you have a bunch of sulfuric acid and you dump some water into it, it causes that water to heat up very quickly, and then it starts to boil, and then you get a lot of splashing. On the other hand, if you add sulfuric acid to a whole bunch of water, it heats up, but you can, first of all, monitor how quickly it gets hot. And second of all, because there's so much more water, that does a better job of keeping your temperature down. And if you need to remember whether to add the acid to the water or the water to the acid, the mnemonic is add acid to the water like you oughter.
There you go. See, that's why George was the one I asked this question to, Mark. Clearly,
Yeah, I get that.
not his first rodeo. Okay, that's the kind of stuff that is one of the things. That's the reason why we have these types of podcasts, is for mnemonics such as those. So that's helpful. No, I think that's an important clarification to make, because anodizers are constantly managing their baths, and because they're managing their baths, they're making additions, doing decants. So obviously temperature plays a pretty big role in anodizing. So if you're going to make an addition of acid and your temperature shoots up, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 degrees, what would that do to the anodic coating, Mark, if the temperature shot up that much and you didn't have a controlled process in place to address that?
Tej, that's an excellent question. Appreciate you asking that. So as your temperature rises, correct? And if you are not anodizing by constant current, then what happens is you'll get more dissolution of the anodic coating. You'll get a wider pore. You could get burning. Also, because your pore structure won't be uniform, you could have an issue come up where you just can't seal it as well. So possibly failing ADTs, failing modified dye stain. And again, you also run the risk of burning the parts as well. So
who would have thought something as trivial as how to make an addition could have this much of an issue on the process? It's pretty important stuff. Yes, the next question I have here is, what is the quote unquote right amount of acid to have in a type 2 sulfuric acid bath? So again, this is one of those important ones. Mark, you made a face there as if I should have caveated that. What were you going to say before I interrupted you?
You know, that's the beauty of video, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, you can just see the physical reaction.
Clearly, the statement I made bothered you, so I want to see I want to make sure that your voice.
No, I was because we've talked about this as type 2, correct?
Right, correct.
But aren't there other nomenclatures that we could use besides type 2? Like if our listeners are, and how did the type 2? What's that even reference? Is that an old Alcoa spec? I don't think so.
No,
that would be 204.
Right. Well, clearly, yeah. Obviously, who doesn't know that?
Oh, well, there you go. So I guess we must be talking about a mill spec.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's a good point you raised. So to your point, Mark, type 2 sulfuric is referenced in mill 8625 as one of the 3 types of anodizing, type 1 being chromic, type 2 being sulfuric, and type 3 being hard coat. Now, here's a question. Can you do hard coat anodizing with sulfuric acid? And the answer is yes, if you run the chemistry the correct way and the process parameters the right way. So referencing Mark's original point around sulfuric acid, what does type 2 represent? Type 2 represents conventional anodizing, which is typically done at 68 degrees between a current density of 8 amps per square foot and as high as 15 or 16 amps per square foot. But it's designed for cosmetic applications, not necessarily for high abrasion resistance. That's what that's what hard coat's designed to do. But in the case of developing a tank and making up a tank, and you're required to come up with an acid concentration, there are many opinions on what that acid concentration should be, specifically for type 2. I am of the opinion the minimum acid that you need to have in an anodizing tank is at least 180 grams per liter of sulfuric acid.
Ooh.
Now, that's my perspective. I'm not saying that's an edict. With that said, there are a lot of other people who run it by percent by volume, anywhere from 18 to 20%. I stick with grams per liter because it's simple for me to understand it that way, and the specific gravity of sulfuric acid plays a role in that. The higher the amount of sulfuric acid concentration, the more conductive the bath, but also the higher the likelihood of coating dissolution. And here's where I will turn it over to George to explain to us what coating dissolution is.
Oh, Lord. Okay. So, Mark actually covered this for the most part. You've got your aluminum oxide, and if the temperature gets high, or even at lower temperatures, the sulfuric acid will dissolve the alumina. Aluminum is what's considered an amphoteric metal, so that it dissolves in acids and bases, but the oxide will dissolve in acids. And like most other reactions of that sort, the higher your temperature is and the higher your concentration is, the faster your aluminum oxide will dissolve.
Okay. In terms of the acid concentration then, George, from your perspective, what have you seen the ranges to be from an acid concentration perspective?
I have seen ranges from 155 to 175. I have seen 155 work. It seems like it's a little bit more finicky, honestly, but and you need to be able to get pretty high voltage so you can get that current, because like you mentioned, the more electrolyte you have in there, which is your sulfuric acid, the better your conductivity is. And the relationship between your voltage and your current is dictated by, in most part, by the conductivity.
Right. So to George's point, everyone out there, the higher the conductivity of the bath, the lower your voltage. So let's, for example, say a bath has 150 grams per liter of sulfuric acid. Another bath has 250 grams per liter of sulfuric acid. Your voltages, when you start the anodizing process, will likely be different. The bath with more acid will have a lower voltage. So some of the reason why people run higher acid concentrations is they may have a rectifier or a power supply that can't hit certain voltages. And so to compensate for that, they'll try to use a more conductive bath. For the purposes of type 2 anodizing, to George's point, it can kind of range in terms of as low as 150, as high. I've seen customers running as high as 220. In the case of hard anodizing, where you're going to be anodizing at a temperature of 32 degrees, since the temperature of the bath is being cut in half almost, your conductivity plummets because of the lower temperature. So since you're running a lower temperature, in many cases, when people are running hard coat baths, they'll run with higher acid to compensate for the fact that the temperature is lower and their voltages are higher. So again, that's qualitative, advice from what I've seen, but a lot of it depends on the process that you run. Mark, you're an anodizer. What have you seen the acid concentrations range from in your experience?
165, 205.
See, okay, there you go. So there's obviously a lot of room to work within. I don't think there's any hard and fast number, but I think it depends on what you're doing and what your requirements are. And I think based off of that, you develop a process that you can repeat. And so that's something to be aware of. Now, one other thing to be aware of with anodizing, as you anodize, and we referenced this earlier, you have coating dissolution. And so as coating dissolution kind of occurs through the process, you eventually start building up aluminum. So one of the questions we have here is, how do you maintain a type 2 sulfuric anodizing bath? And so to answer that question, obviously keeping the sulfuric acid concentration, whatever range it needs to be in for your process, but also to keep an eye on aluminum. So from my perspective, if you are doing type 2 clear anodizing or two-step electrolytic coloring, aluminum plays a role, but not as much of a role as it would be if you were doing organic dyeing. And so from my perspective, at least, higher aluminum levels above 12 or 13 grams per liter in an anodizing bath that you will be doing organic dyeing with can be an issue because they can contaminate the organic dyes. If you're doing clear work or electrolytic, I think you have a higher threshold of the amount of aluminum you can have in that tank. I've seen customers run 25 grams per liter of aluminum. And since they're doing clear or electrolytic, it has not been an issue for them. But eventually, as you maintain temperature, you will start having issues. So I usually advise my customers to keep their tanks below 15 grams per liter of aluminum, whether they're doing organic dyeing or clear or two-step. George, what about you? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm mostly curious about if you've seen anything that happens when you get up to like 25 grams per liter. Like
yeah.
What happens?
So in many cases, and I'm not an expert in this, is just what I've seen. When you have an external heat exchanger, what I've found is if your aluminum levels get too high, you start making ice cream in that heat exchanger because the aluminum comes out of solution. You make like a gel or paste, and it's a big problem. Mark, you're shaking your head like you've made ice cream before.
Oh, yes, but not on the podcast.
So it can be an issue, I think. And I think, people need to realize that there are some risks doing that and downtime, contamination of subsequent chemicals. But I think the biggest factor from answering the members' question here is keeping the aluminum levels at a specific amount, particularly below 15 grams per liter, is a good practice.
Okay. Yeah, I've never seen aluminum get that high in my life. The most I've ever seen is like, I think 13 or so.
Oh, all right. So then, yeah. So I've been lucky enough to see that happen with certain anodizers. It's not a fun experience.
I can't imagine.
The other thing to be aware of is aluminum dissolution is the types of cathodes that you're using. So one thing that people need to realize is if your cathodes are made of aluminum, which in most cases, typically most cathodes are made out of aluminum. If they are, they need to be 6063 T6 temper, an alloy type. Those typically do not dissolve or gas when they are in solution. A lot of other aluminum does. And so what ends up happening is you start having your aluminum levels increase faster because your cathodes are dissolving. So that's one other thing to keep in mind from a tank maintenance perspective. Let's see.
No, it doesn't dissolve as much? Lead.
Lead does not. Lead is also lead. That's being phased out from what I hear. I've seen customers use stainless steel.
Okay.
The risk of stainless steel is you may get chrome or some other heavy metals in your tank over time, and it's not as conductive as aluminum. Yeah. So there's some risks with that too. But yeah, lead, I have seen one tank in my entire life that had lead cathodes. But yeah, I don't think they're as popular as they used to be.
Oh gosh.
And that kind of blows the whole argument of sulfuric anodizing not being as dangerous for the environment when we're using lead cathodes.
We learn something new every few years, right?
Right, exactly. All right, let's go through the questions here. Let's see if there's anything I missed. Here's a good question. What applications are type 2 anodizing used for? So it's a fairly large aperture or net of stuff that it could address. So I'll take it from the job shop side, the small parts side, and then I'll let the two of you big architectural experts weigh in on it. But from what I've seen in terms of applications for type 2 anodizing, It's a lot of consumer products. So it could be cosmetic shells or caps for women's cosmetics. It can be electrical consumer products like your iPhones, tablets. Those are all made of anodized aluminum. Different Bluetooth speakers. I know Bang & Olufsen uses anodizing on a lot of their products. Furniture can be made from anodized aluminum. Picture frames. I mean, it's a fairly prolific material in day-to-day life. That's the small parts piece of it, right? Obviously, defense, aerospace. I mean, you name it, it's throughout that whole area. I have, interestingly enough, seen a anodizer of jewelry. They anodize like earrings, rings, bracelets. So it's a pretty prolific process on the Type-II like consumer side. I know there are a number of applications on the architectural side, which, Mark, you can weigh in on, but there's a lot of use for it.
You're absolutely right. From an architectural standpoint, Tej, it seems to be the finish of choice when you look at storefronts and all these strip malls. You're either seeing a dark bronze or a clear anodized. And the dark bronze finish today is an electrolytic two-step color. Back in the day, it used to be Duronotic, and that's don't know how many tanks there are in the U.S., but that's been replaced by two-step electrolytic. So you have the storefront, you have automatic door entrances as well. The Super Bowl was this past weekend out in L.A. The aluminum panels that are on the roof there were anodized plate, anodized sheet, and that was a clear anodized. And when you hear the architect, which hopefully one day we'll be able to get him on this podcast, of why they specified anodizing, it's really interesting to hear his passion of how the anodic coating reacted with the sunlight in various stages of the day on the stadium there. So it's on those cases there, they were plate that was anodized. Also, composite sheet is used a lot in the architectural industry for on the skin enclosure of buildings. So that's another area where we see anodizing being used. Now, and this is where, we talk about Type-II, but if you're an architect, typically you would specify a Class 1, not a Type-II coating. And so, Type-II can be, that phraseology could be intermixed with different call outs, whether it's a Class 1 AMA or a Class 2. And going off to Alcoa, they used to use a 204 or 215 was another call out. Then you have the Aluminum Association. And so, Tej, when we're talking about Type-II, is there a certain coating thickness that we need to meet?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So obviously the architectural space has some requirements, Class 1, Class 2, but I'll take it from, again, the job shop space. If you're doing clear anodize, you don't really need to go above 4/10 because it's just straight up clear. There's no dyeing that's occurring. You're doing it for a functional benefit of corrosion resistance, etc. Now, if you're going to dye the part a color, I recommend at least 7/10 coating thickness. Call that 20 microns. And the reason for that is a few things. One, if you're going to dye a part, you need to ensure the coating is thick enough to absorb all that dye. And the thicker the coating, the more dye you can get in there, the more robust the coating is, the better the color is, the better the durability is. So that's my take on it. Typically, that if you're going to do dyeing of some sort, you want to do a minimum of 7/10. Clear is pretty much anything less than 5/10. Now, I know for architectural, Mark, Class 1, Class 2 tracks a little bit to that, but I know that there's requirements there for the architectural industry that need to meet that.
That's right, and you're absolutely right. If you're going to put it outside, it's going to be on the building. You definitely want to have a Class 1, which is a 0.7 mil anodic coating thickness, and typically interior we'll go a Class 2. which is a 0.4. And then also the Aluminum Association has their anodic coating designation system. And theirs runs from a 0.1 thick all the way up to a 0.7. And they have different call outs, whether it's an A31, which is 0.4 of a mil. They have an A34, which is 0.4 electrolyte coloring. So there's several ways to peel the onion back to specify what type of coating you want, whether it's type 2, whether it's 204, 215, whether it's AMA 611, or using the Aluminum Association. Would you agree?
Yeah, everyone likes to have their own specification, I find. What may be easiest for our listeners to do is I would suggest you go to www.anodizing.org. There is, under Anodizing Information, there is a what is anodizing page. And that's kind of the holy grail of information for individuals who are just trying to understand, what are the basics of this? Because a lot of the references that you made, Mark, and that we'll see in the industry have been compiled in a pretty nice format on the Aluminum Anodizers Council's website. So I would encourage everyone to go out there, take a look at it, because that's going to give you a direction to move forward in terms of understanding what anodizing is and what all the different specifications that are out there. Because it can be pretty overwhelming if you look at it and you're talking about it now and you're like, what does that even mean? So I would encourage all of our listeners and our members to go out there and take a look to really understand, what are the details of this. That concludes a lot of the questions that we had from our submitted list. Any other questions you guys have or anything that's okay? George is ready to rock and roll.
I have so many questions, guys.
Perfect.
All right. Question number 1, what was the first thing that you knew was anodized? Ooh. Like you saw a thing and it was like, this is an anodized thing.
Oh, well, okay. I know what it was. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and Mark will appreciate this. My father is a bit of has a passion for anodized aluminum. What he did not have a passion for was giving me any toy that I wanted growing up. So I remember I was trying to get him to go into a Toys R Us with me so he'd get me a toy, and we couldn't make it past the front door because he was critiquing the storefront anodizing as poor quality because it had orange peel. And he said, look, Tej, this is bad anodizing. And I was like, no. Dad, I just want to get a G.I. Joe and get out of here. And we couldn't make it into Toys R Us for at least 10 minutes because he was inspecting the storefront. So did I like that at that time? Did I like what I was being told about anodizing? Frankly, not. But I will never forget that the Toys R Us in Charlotte, North Carolina, had poor storefront. And Mark, I would assume that could not have been an Acron finished storefront, right?
I would be shocked and appalled to hear you make such a statement.
I know. That's why I figured it was not. Okay.
Good.
Well, that doesn't surprise because Toys R Us is bankrupt now, so they probably it's probably well overdue.
Oh no! What about you, Mark?
Okay, so truth be told, I'm an SOB, son of a boss. My dad started an anodizing factory 35, 40 years ago at least. My first recollection of really understanding the anodizing and the benefit. Back in the day when the Ford F-150 had an aluminum extrusion that was on the side of the truck that held the side rearview mirror on it. That was bright dipped clear anodized. And we ran that through our factory up in Nanticoke, Pennsylvania. We did about 12,000 arms. So an arm was that aluminum piece that held the glass side rearview mirror on the truck. And we did about 12,000 of those a day. And that's probably, my first real experience with anodizing was working in the shop and just seeing what that looks like and how it can function in society. It provided a not only economic growth for the area we were in, provided wages for our people that worked for us, but it met a requirement of Ford Motor Company that, they needed that side rearview mirror to look like it did 3, 4, 5 years down the road from the day the person walked off the lot with it. So That's my recollection of that.
Okay. That is, yeah, it's so I am not the son of a boss or an anodizer. So my first the first thing that I realized was anodized was actually the anodized cooking pot that my mom had.
Yeah.
I just remember it was mostly it was really nice, and the food that came out of it was really good. I think she still has it, and we're talking what, 30 years now that the thing's been kicking. You know,
They don't make them like they used to. Yeah, they don't make them like they used to.
Why don't we make anodized pots like that anymore?
Well, I think because you have people out there who are doing hard code anodizing when we're really doing Type-II anodizing. That's the problem. That's what I think's happening.
Okay. So second question. I thought this was going to be more rapid fire, but I'm loving these answers. What's your favorite color of dyed aluminum? That look in your face.
Favorite color?
Yeah.
Bright dip, hard coat, black.
Oh.
You want to talk about a finish that's unbelievable.
Oh gosh, I can imagine it.
Right alloy 6463, a 6063 come in second, but with 6463 bright dip, hard coat, black. You put that on instruments and handheld devices. You got a hard surface with a beautiful shiny black. I just think that's just the cat's meow.
God, it almost looks like glassy, right?
Yes.
Oh, that's sexy. That's nice.
That is.
All right, everybody. I'm gonna have to hose you two down. Take it easy. Take it easy. As a supplier of dyes to the anodizing industry, it would be unfair for me to select any one out of the array of colors we could do.
Very well.
With that said, the color that I am a big fan of is a good old brown gray. It's like a muddied gunmetal color. We did a few parts for some defense applications. They were for Vietnam era M16s, and we were doing them and they were just beautiful. They had a little bit of a rustic look, but a good brownish gray, like a muddied, darker gray, I think looks spot on.
Okay. And here I am sitting here thinking hot pink is my favorite. It's just one of those things, like you don't see that kind, like you can see blues and greens and yellows on all sorts of things like paints and plastics and whatever, but something about anodized hot pink that has that sort of metallic look to it, it's just weirdly unique. I don't know, it just screams like
some pinks, George, some pinks are better than others.
Okay. Oh, wow, that is a really nice color swatch you got there. Mark, send me one of those color swatches. I want that thing.
You know what? I'm surprised this dye stuff has not taken off in the industry. It's called Pink Tej Liquid. This baby here is a hot color. Hot.
Yeah. Wow. Who needs to be hosed down now? Wow.
Yeah. Well, clearly the inventor of that dye needs to be. But yeah, that is. It's unfortunate. It never really made the splash that it was supposed to in the industry.
All right, Doctor.
I feel like I had more questions. Oh gosh, I feel like I had more, but it's not coming to me. So, do you guys have anything in the meantime?
Yeah, I do. What's the difference between anodizing and plating? Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
Sorry, I lost you for a second. Difference between what?
What's the difference between anodizing and plating?
Oh, I mean, that's easy. So anodizing, you're using electrolytic current to actually oxidize the metal. So it's built up from the aluminum substrate and you form aluminum oxide from the metal itself. Mm-hmm. With plating, you're taking something that's in the bath. With nickel plating, there's nickel in the bath. With chrome plating, there's chrome in the bath, and you dump it on top of the metal or whatever else. Like there's like plating on plastic and stuff like that. And that's all really cool stuff. But yeah, it's a different process. And the big thing that I hear about in terms of performance is that with aluminum, anodized aluminum, because it's an integral part of the metal, it doesn't delaminate. It's not really a coating per se, but it's actually part of the metal in a sense. I don't know. Anodizing is super neat. Plating is honestly also super cool.
Well, to your point though, anodizing is grown from the aluminum, plating is deposited from the solution on. And George, that is a cool mug you're drinking. Are you going to send out whatever that mug is to your fellow podcasters?
It is a corporate mug.
Yeah. Okay. I know Tej and I would like to have one. Nice
well,
just a sign of a good faith gesture, George. That's all.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do. I'll see what I can do. Okay. I will say I had this other mug that I gave to my boss Linda, who everyone in the industry knows. I was in Greece, and they were selling these souvenir anodized aluminum wine pitchers that are like, yay big, like maybe the size of like 2 fists or so. And so you can fit in like, a good like 400 mils of wine in there. And it's, it's really cute. It's fun. It gets really cold really fast. And then I bought it for her. And then, a few days into the trip, I stopped by a place that actually was using it. And these were all dyed anodized aluminum. And so it was this really nice orange color, but you could see on the inside that the orange color had completely bled out from just years of use. And I was like, hope I'm not drinking some of that dye in there.
Oh.
Yeah, that's not good. Food application, as a supplier of dyes, you do not want those dyes. You don't want, chrome, trivalent chrome Bordeaux R.
Nope, you definitely don't want that in your food.
I would, we gotta get in touch with that Greek anodizer at Athens and figure out what the heck they're doing over there, because that is poor anodizing. They probably anodized by voltage, and then they probably didn't even seal the part, is my guess.
That's probably what it is. That is my thinking.
It was in microns too.
My last question of the day would be this, especially as it relates to the architectural field. Will the anodic coating chip like paint can sometimes chip?
Nope.
Why?
Well, as I understand it, paint is an adhesive that goes onto a piece of metal. At the end of the day, it's an adhesive, and any adhesive can come off. In the case of anodizing, you're converting aluminum, to George's point, aluminum oxide. There's no adhesive there. You're converting a metal to a ceramic. Now, there are situations where if you took a piece of aluminum and you bent it so much, or you heated it up so much, you could cause that ceramic layer to crack, but it's not going to peel off like a paint does.
Or even chip.
Yeah.
Right. Nice. Well,
all right. Well,
I think it's time like at a Thanksgiving meal, when everyone's just talked out and then it's quiet.
Yeah. I think we got a lot done today, and I think we answered a lot of questions. I'm optimistic that we've educated the next generation of individuals who are going to be anodizers.
Yeah.
Hopefully they can follow along, because we took some twists, we took some turns.
We did, but that's, you got to enjoy the ride, Mark. You of all people should know that.
Okay.
All right, guys. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for listening. And again, we look forward to doing this again. With that said, thank you for listening to Ano Talk.
All
things anodizing.